Hey everybody, we're back. All right. Don't even ask me about the ECU. It's not pretty. So we're going to concentrate on the things that we can talk about today on the new Kawasaki ZH2 Supercharged Streetfighter. When last we met, I was trying to figure out whether or not the secret handshake worked. We had all kinds of things going on. I want to thank a couple of our YouTube viewers from Europe. Said, hey Rock, we've been dealing with this Euro 5 stuff for a while. Go to this website. You can find a connector so you can get your OBD2 meter to read. And if you look, we now have our magical connector so that not only can we clear the fault codes quickly using OBD2, but we can also measure more things more accurately on the dyno since we have that working. So that's a little bit of progress. What we're going to concentrate on today is installing our new Swingarm extensions. And you know, if you bought this bike because you like the wheelie, then you're golden. If you bought this bike because you want an economical, relatively, supercharged, de-restricted killer, well, it is going to be violent when we finally do get it de-restricted in stock wheelbase form. So one of the things we've done, and we've mentioned it a couple times, we have created swing arm extensions that will bolt right on, and it gives you almost 6 additional inches of wheelbase. I'll explain to you why I say almost, because of course we'd love to just give you as much as we can, although 6 really is our limit. We've seen things like this fail in the past, so we try to keep it in the sane region when we make them. So anyway, we'll get to that during the process of installation, but the first thing that we're going to need to address when installing the swing arm extensions is, of course, the rear wheel is going to have to be removed. Now, we went ahead and moved our lift here into the studio to make it a little bit easier on us. If you don't have a lift, that's okay, but the rear of the bike really has to be securely handled as far as getting the wheel off the ground. So, spools. And for those of you who may not know, the little bungs are the little threaded inserts are always there for rear wheel spools. And then I happen to have a stand here that we fabricated not too long ago. Makes it handy so you're not tripping over stuff. Any rear stand will do, just so long as it's nice and sturdy. Now, the rear has to be up and secure. If you can secure the front, it's a bonus. It's nothing but a bonus because you don't want the bike falling over. We've got it in our wheel chalk here. If you've got a front wheel stand, you may want to do that also. So anyway, what we're going to do, also if you have an assistant, it could really come in handy because when you're getting the wheel off, not only do you not want to scratch the heck out of your bike, but you don't want to be dropping stuff. So any help you can get, you'll appreciate it. I'm going to enlist the help of my son Brody here and have him. You do not need to remove your muffler. We're going to go ahead and do it just to give you a better view of what's going on. Makes it a little bit simpler, and it is very easy to take this off. So we'll go ahead and start working on that, and I will talk to you about some of the things that you may not think about in advance. You know, okay, hey, I got swing arm extensions, cool, I'm going to put them on and my bike's going to go straight, I'm going to outrun all my buddies. Well, there's some other things that you need to think about also, and we'll get to that here in a moment. Alright, to remove our penta-carbon exhaust, you're going to need a spring puller, a 12mm wrench, an 11mm deep well socket for the clamp here, and then also a 6mm Allen to get the bolt off. I'm going to have Brody go ahead and take this off, start taking that off while we talk about some other considerations. Obviously, swing arm extensions are designed to move the wheel back. Well, what all does that do? What else do you have to consider? Naturally, if the wheel comes back, you have to worry about your brake line. Some bikes, and I'm doing this on the ZH2, but if you've got other swing arm extensions, other brands, this is going to apply to you also. The brake line. I know on this particular bike that there is no way that that brake line is going to be able to come all the way back. Now, if we disconnected all the hardware, we might be able to stretch it back. That'd sort of be up to you. What we do when we install them here, our friends over at Spiegler Performance Parts made us up a special brake line. It's extended 5 inches. So to install this, you know, you're going to need brake fluid, and if you don't have a Mighty Vac, buy one of those things. It makes it so much simpler. We're not actually going to install this right now because we're just sort of concentrating on the extensions, but keep that in mind. The other thing, new bikes these days, you can see these slots. This is a wheel speed sensor, and that wheel speed sensor is critical. If you just unbolt it and leave it not working, your bike's gonna flip out, because same as on the dyno where your front wheel's not spinning. Now all of a sudden it thinks your rear wheel's not spinning and it starts throwing all kinds of codes. So we've managed to come up with a cable here. It's just an extension harness. We made it 15-inch over so the guys with the real long swing arms can use them. But that gives you plenty of room, and you can just, so Brady, can I step in here for a second? For those of you who are going to install the harness, the line goes straight up into here, and I'm not going to pull the tank off, but it's really simple. You just pull the tank, unplug the line, plug it into here, plug this back where it was, and you've got plenty of room to be able to move this back. So the other thing, when you move your wheel back, your chain is going to be too short. What are you going to do about that? This bike comes with a 525 chain. For our application, we're not going to go with a 525. We're going to go with a 530 and a robust 530, because you only need to break one chain and wipe your engine cases out before you get over that whole, oh yeah, but if my chain is half an ounce lighter, I go faster. That's crap. Do it at the racetrack. Swap it at the racetrack. I promise you, you will not see or feel anything. So anyway, we're going to go with a robust chain, which means we're going to have to change our front sprocket and rear sprocket over to a 530 instead of the 525. We stock them here. We go with the Vortex aluminum sprockets. You know, if you're a cross-country iron butt dude, stick with your steel sprockets. For the rest of us, you know, getting 10, 15, 20,000 miles out of the aluminum sprockets just fine. Gearing. Oh, man. Hate gearing questions. What's the best gearing? I'm going to put, let's see, up in the left-hand corner of the screen, I'm going to put a link to an FAQ about gearing, because everybody always wants to know about gearing, and it's just not as simple as what's the best gearing for my bike. It depends on a lot of variables, a lot of factors, what kind of riding you're doing. Are you drag racing? Are you roll racing? Are you land speed racing? The gearing is different for all of those. So we'll try to get you steered in the right direction. And I'm going to show you something here that we use to help us figure out what's going on. We have an Excel spreadsheet that my buddy, God rest his soul, Davo, came up with many years ago, Land Speed Racer. And basically what we do is we input the ratios that are relevant to the gearing. And when I say that, so if you look at this primary reduction, what does that mean? Well, this means there's 50 teeth on the crankshaft, there's 74 teeth on the clutch basket, and then you go through the gear sets. First gear, second gear, blah, 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 blah. This is all directly out of the service manual. And then you get to the secondary reduction, which your secondary ratio is your chain and sprockets that we're talking about. So this particular bike, the ZH2, comes with an 18 and a 46 do a little bit of math. We're going to go with a circumference of 76 inches, a measured circumference. Now that'll change depending on how much your tire wears. So that's what I mean. This is all this stuff matters, but you can do it fairly simply. So what I want to show you here is, since we're not in the ECU, we don't know the exact peak RPM limit, but if we look on the dyno here, you can see when it finally runs out of steam, it's somewhere in the 12.5 to 12.6 range. And look at this bonus. See what this is? This is the throttle. So we're able to measure the throttle now. So at wide open throttle, and keep the, I know I say this all the time, but it really confuses people. On the dyno, we whack the gas wide open, 3,000 RPM. Well, you can see the gas isn't wide open. At 5,000 RPM, it's at 60%. At 7,000, it's at 90%. It finally gets to 100% right about 8,000 RPM, and it only stays at 100% until about 10.3, 10.4, around in there. And then this is where Big Brother starts kicking in. The throttle shutting. Now remember, I'm at 100% throttle, but the ECU is saying, nope, 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 you're going too fast, you're making too much noise. And it actually drops down, and I know this is a little confusing here, but let's go here. It drops down to about 45% open right before it hits the rev limiter. So whatever it's for, noise abatement, emissions, saving you from yourself. If we go ahead and look at this gear chart, now remember, and we've talked about it before, the gentleman's agreement where you're not allowed to go over 186 miles an hour. Well, on this bike, taking that peak into consideration, you're also gearing limited to 177. Now, will this bike go 177? Not with the throttle half closed, right? How fast will it go? You got to figure that out on your own. So anyway, just giving you an idea. Once we can get it de-restricted, once we can get it making full power, the gearing is going to change. For now, if it were me, and I didn't know what I was going to do and I was just going to keep on riding, the stock gearing is great. You just can't keep the bike on the ground. So just leave it stock for now and then go practice, get some different sprockets and see which ones work out best for you. So anyway, all right, we have the penta-carbon removed. Now we're going to remove the rear brake and sort of set it aside. One of the things I want to be real careful about here, when you pull the brake up, there's a really good chance that you're going to scratch your wheel. So we just put some painter's tape on it just to sort of prevent things from getting scratched up. All right, that should be good. So the first thing we're going to do is pull the rear brake caliper off. For this, you're going to need a 14 millimeter socket, a 12 millimeter socket, an 8 millimeter socket, something to protect the caliper with, and something to hold it up and out of the way. Real simple stuff. All right, now we've got the bolts removed. One of the things that we're going to do right now too is just sort of take these wheel speed sensors and get them out of the way. Well, wheel speed sensor, sorry, there's actually two screws holding it in. That's your wheel speed sensor, and it's doing nothing more than sensing the slots, well, the metal part of the slot. So screw there. All right, now we've got the hardware out, almost. All right, we're going to remove the caliper, trying to make sure that we're not running into the wheel. What if it doesn't want to come up, you can sort of move it left to right to get yourself a little more wiggle room. And then this is a pretty strange setup that the Kawasaki's have. These sort of float. There's a little metal shim here that's really important. You want to make sure that this goes back in exactly the way it came out. This is a different setup. Your setup may be a little bit even more different, but they're all similar. What we're gonna do, we're just gonna go ahead and, Bertie, would you mind holding that for me? We're gonna wrap the caliper up here. Now, if you saw our Jixilla series when we were doing the front brakes, we put something in between the handlebar and the brake lever, because if your friend comes up and just unconsciously starts pumping on your rear brake while it's disconnected, it turns into a big pain in your butt. So don't let them do that. If you have an attack dog, that works good. Keep loud. Keep loud. Good boy. Brakes. Good boy. Stay away from my brake lever. Just sort of keep them away. And then we're just gonna, we'll just wrap that up out of the way. Let this sort of hang here for now. All right, now we're not scratching anything up. We're gonna go ahead and move these parts so that they don't fall. And then we'll address pulling the rear wheel. One thing I want to mention before we go ahead and take off the rear wheel, as a general rule, we go by, this is approximately an inch, right? Doesn't really matter what it is. So if you extend your wheelbase back 6 inches, let's say, you're going to need 6 inches more chain on the top, 6 inches more on the bottom. Generally, we stock 150 link chains here, and that's good enough for most applications. Then you just cut it to size, and you'll be good to go. All right, we're going to go ahead and address removing the rear wheel. Now, before we do that, think about this also. If you move your wheel back, you're gonna need to address the tail tidy situation, right? This isn't gonna work out. So that needs to be removed, replaced, whatever you want to do to get it out of the way. In the stock application, you're gonna need some pliers to get the cotter pin out. Drag racers, we're doing a lot of chain adjusting at the track, so we use the little, spring cotter keys here. Whichever way you prefer is fine. You're going to need a 32 millimeter socket and 2 12 millimeter open end wrenches to get this off. We'll just sort of show you what we're doing here. Not too tight. Just bust the jam nut loose, and you can get that, just take a little pressure off of that. Do the same thing over here. Now, while I'm over here, if you want to move the camera, another thing to think of, the swing arm pivot angle. These swing arms these days have a tendency to really slope down some. Now, we've got this bike lowered already. We've got our lowering links on it, and we've already got our adjustable kickstand. But if it weren't lowered, the swing arm attack angle would be down further. So when you put an extended swing arm on it, it's going to raise your bike. So if you're okay with the bike being raised, you can leave it alone, and your stock links and kickstand should be okay, but your bike on the side stand, because it's taller, is going to lean over quite a bit more. That's why we go ahead and put our lowering links on and our adjustable kickstand so that we're able to put it wherever we want. So just another one of those little things that a lot of folks don't think about. They're just excited about their extensions, but there's a little more to it than that if you're going to do it right. All right, so we just need a little slop in the chain here. Now this is where you could really use a helper, because obviously when we pull this axle out, this wheel is going to want to drop. Right? Simple little stuff, so it just doesn't come crashing down and tear up your tape. Now I am going to sort of keep it here. I'm going to have Brody pull the axle out. I'm going to keep pressure off of it. Got it? I'm going to let it sit down there now. Oops. We're going to slowly bring it down. Now we can pull this out. There's a little slot here, and there's a slot in the swing arm. So you just pull it back out, move the wheel forward, go ahead and get your chain out. Now you're going to want to pay attention to your spacers. The spacers are not the same. This is your left side spacer. Over on the right, they'll typically have a shorter spacer with a flange on it. We're just going to go ahead and leave those inside the wheel for now. And we're going to just go ahead and get this wheel out of the way. Got All right. Now, we have to remove the OEM adjusters so that we have room to put our extensions in, and you won't be needing these anymore. All right. This bike's almost brand new, right? I think it's got about 600 miles on it right now, so it doesn't have a lot of road debris and grime and things of that nature. One of the things that you're going to want to do is make sure before you put your extensions on that you get everything cleaned up, you know, especially over on the chain side. If you got lube, get it all cleaned up. This is usually, we'll just take some brake cleaner, little brake cleaner, because you don't want anything to grit up your install, for lack of a better term. All right, so what we're going to do now is get the extensions ready for installation. Okay, now we're going to address installing the extensions. We already unboxed them. For this, you're going to need a 6mm socket and two 13mm wrenches to be able to adjust your wheelbase. So first of all, what we're going to do, they come sort of assembled here. This is going to be your right hand side. You can tell because we're simulating, and now we can see it a little bit better. In stock form, the little lug for your brake is right here. We have this one, and this will go like this and take the place of your stock adjuster. We'll go ahead and pull this apart real quick. You can get it?
Yeah. I'm jangly enough.
Drop my tool. And the part of the dyno that opens up to be able to get it has a motorcycle on it, so Brody gets to go diving.
Got it.
All right, so now we have this out. We're just going to set those there for now. Now, one thing that's really, really important is that these extensions have to fit very snug in the slot. And when I say that, it is snug. Now, this piece is cast. Now, this part is machined, so it should, the tolerances on these motorcycles are really, really close. But if by chance your extension doesn't fit in just really straight in like that and nice and tight, you may have to file on the swing arm here, or possibly file on the extension. A little bit of filing is not going to hurt anything. I would probably file on the extension more than I would file on the swing arm, to tell you the truth. And then so once it gets locked in there, it's not, and you can see it. We've got it fitting so tightly that you really have to come straight in with your installation, straight in like that, because if it's off just a little bit, it's not going to work. All right, now these are brand new parts. We're going to use Loctite Red because we do not want these things to come out. One of the things that I always sort of preach about is this is glue. Glue doesn't stick to grease and oil, so it's very important before you put your Loctite on that you make sure that the bolts and the holes that they're going into are all very clean. If you have compressed air, makes things much nicer. All right, now we should be ready to go. Put that in, wipe this off. A little bit of Loctite here. I usually put a couple little stripes on. You don't want it oozing all over the place, but you certainly want to make sure that there's enough in. Now, so basically what we're doing, this will go on the top. You want to come back here. We've got a little machined edge here that goes in, fits in the swing arm real nice. And you can see we have a little bit of movement as soon as we get that tightened down. even a little bit, that movement goes away. All right, let me grab my trusty torque wrench here, and we are going to torque this to 30 foot-pounds. Step tighten them here. I've got it set to about 15 right now. I'm going to go ahead and go up to 30. There you go. You always want to hear the click when you're in the middle of your motion. You want to have a smooth motion also. There we go. All right, so now we are ready to install the other side. You can see this is very, very tight. It has to stay tight. That's why we use Loctite Red. As a habit, when I change my gearing or my tire or anything that requires removal of the rear wheel, I will go back in and make sure that I have my 30 foot-pounds on these bolts. If for some reason they started to come loose, stop, investigate, call us. They shouldn't be coming loose. If you have any kind of problems like that, give us a call and we'll walk you through troubleshooting it. So now we'll go ahead and do the same thing here. This is going to replace this piece. Same deal. This piece is designed to fit in very precisely. Go straight in with it, nice and tight. This doesn't matter which way it goes. So we're going to go ahead and one thing I want to mention, on some bikes, on this particular bike it doesn't have it, but on some bikes there's a metal plate here, and depending on who made your swing arm extensions, generally they're made for that plate to be removed. I've never seen any that aren't, but I've heard of some that were. You can find some terrible products on eBay and Alibaba these days, so just keep that in mind. We're going to go ahead and step this back now, put it back to about 15. Go back up to 30. All right. Now we are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and install the rear wheel here for you because I want to show you something. But I'll get to that here in just a second. All right, we're going to get prepared to put the rear wheel in here. Now, I hope I don't have to pull the whole this lovely arrangement off just yet. We'll see whether or not it'll fit, but I know it's not going to fit with the plate in here. Your OEM piece here, you slide it off, and then our piece goes in like that. And I want you to keep in mind the way this is designed is orientation does matter. So, right, you're going to have to keep in mind to put this in this direction when it's time. So basically, with the flats will be parallel. The flats on the axle will be parallel with this slot. We won't leave this anymore. And then same deal over here. We've got this is wider so that we get as much of the head of the bolt on it as possible. So that's the orientation there. You wouldn't want to put it in that way, and it won't fit that way. All right, let's get the wheel here and see whether or not we can slip it up in. Man, that's gonna be close. All right. Now, one of the things I want to show you here, let's go ahead and look at this. As I'm pushing the wheel in, now remember, previously it was way far forward, but when we put the extension on, it's going to move it back. Well, look what happens to the stock lug. So that's why we made the amount of adjustment that there is, so that you can't come back and run into that stock lug, because I don't want you guys taking a die grinder to it or whatever. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that make crazy long ones and you can go grinding on all your stuff. That's not how we do it here. Believe me, the amount, we've got not quite 6 inches over wheelbase, stock wheelbase on this bike as it is right now. We just measured it earlier this morning, was right at 57 inches. It has been lowered a little bit. So we pull that back to almost 64 inches. It's gonna be a really big difference in how this bike stays on the ground, whether the ECU is de-restricted or not. It's going to help out a whole bunch. So, can I get your help over here, Brody? So what we're going to do, we can actually sort of keep that in there. Stock piece will now slip up, go right up there, and then we're going to try and lift it up. Got it? All right. Pretty nice. So, with this pulled all the way back, look how close we are to hitting that lug. But we don't hit it. So, anywhere that you use this, it's just going to get better clearance-wise. So, just go ahead, slide that in. Obviously, if we took this bike for a ride right now, as soon as we ran over a bump, we'd have problems here. Another thing that you're going to have to think about is shock adjustments. Now, as a drag racer, if we drag race this bike, we put a drag shock on it. But because you've got the additional leverage now, you're going to have to adjust your spring, and especially your spring preload, because basically the bike is going to be spongy now that we have it extended. So you tighten up your spring preload. On a stock shock, we usually crank the compression, the rebound. We crank them pretty much all the way up just to try to get the bike, because of course when you tighten up the spring, it's going to want to bounce. I've got a whole video on adjusting the suspension with drag shock that we'll link to in this, either in the description, or we'll throw a card up. So anyway, we have to keep this bike stock wheelbase for now. I'm not going to go ahead. You don't need me to show you how to cut a chain or change a sprocket. Google it, check it out on YouTube, whatever. And then one of the things I do want to keep in mind here, whenever you adjust the chain, you always want the chain to be forcing backwards, the adjusters to be moving backwards, because if not, you get what's called shear. So it's sort of easier to explain over here. And of course, this is going to be a really exaggerated example, but when you get on the gas, the top rung of the chain gets really, really tight, and if you have pushed back when you're tightening the chain, then when it comes back, it won't move. But if let's say you it's too tight, so you just turn this in, well, then you get this shear effect. And the problem with shear is you can break the bolts, you can have all kinds of issues with it. So make sure that you're always pushing back and I always tighten down the axle to be fairly tight, not all the way to the torque spec, which I'll have to look that up. Bertie, can you find me the torque spec for this rear axle? So anyway, I hope that's not confusing for you, but just always, whenever you adjust your chain, adjust it a little bit at a time, check your tension, and then lock it down to keep that shear out of the way. All right, I grabbed the owner's manual and the axle torque is 130 Newton meters or 95.9 foot-pounds. Tight, tight, tight. So this is the part where you really need a factory service manual when you start worrying about your brake lines and the rest of the stuff. I pulled my Mighty vac out. If you haven't seen one of these, man, they're about $100, but they make it so much simpler to bleed your brakes. It's really as simple as replacing your line, putting a hose on here, putting it on your caliper, and it just sucks the new brake fluid up into this. No bubbles in the line. It's really a handy thing. The only other thing I want to mention is this little shim when you put your brake back on. And once again, we did this for demonstration purposes on how to put the extension on. We plan on riding this bike stock wheelbase with all of its horsepower. I'm gonna have to figure out the adjustments, whether or not it can even be ridden. So I don't want to lengthen it just yet. We'll lengthen it before we give it back to the owner if that's what he wants. But just make sure that little clip is clipped in correctly. One of the things about this brake, and when you go to put this back together, the way this is designed, these just sort of hang here, and the whole idea is for these tabs to go up into this little clip. And I want to show you what's supposed to happen is when you go to put it back in, both sides fall into the clip like that, and then you put the caliper on. If you want to move around to the back there, but you can see it's possible to put it on incorrectly. I could bolt this down right now and my brakes would not work. So what has to happen is you just have to be very, very careful to get those pushed in, and sometimes the brake line sort of works against you here, so that way you can push it all the way up. I'm actually gonna peek around here, make sure I've got it right. Looks good. Now just sort of hold it in place and go ahead and put our caliper mounting bolts in. Once you get the bolts in, it's not a problem anymore because it can't fall. It can't fall out. And then assembly is in reverse order of disassembly, and use the torque specs in your manual for all your bolts, and that's really it. We're going to start pulling this thing apart now so we can go play with it some more next time. What are we going to do next time? Well, we really hope we have better news on the ECU flash. This thing is being a real booger, and we should have a way to adjust the fuel. I don't want to really let the cat entirely out of the bag, but I got friends in good places. So once we can address the fuel tune on this motorcycle, then we'll be able to take the slip-on off, put the full system on, and see what kind of power we can get. So until next time, I'm Brock from Brock's Performance. Thanks for the help, Brody. We'll see you then.